The point of highest drama in this story, the point of lowest comedy, took place halfway through my gastronomic tour of south and western France in 1985. This was not a highly organized tour. It wasn't a tour I signed up for that someone else led and I decided to join. It was rather a response to my low state of mind as I left Switzerland. I had arrived in Switzerland with high hopes to visit a friend in Bern, a friend I'll call Maria. I had high hopes arriving. I had no hope on leaving. I arrived by train, I left by train. I was there maybe a week in between, and my spirits could not have been more disparate on arriving and on leaving Bern, Switzerland. She didn't outright reject me exactly. It was much more ambiguous than that. But there was another man she wanted to go see in Heidelberg, Germany, a man named Willi. And when I was on the train leaving Lausanne and going to Geneva, and then heading out towards Annecy in France, this Maria was on her train going towards Heidelberg. I had enough money saved up from cab driving to last me several months in Europe, if I was careful with my money. And it was in Annecy that I decided, since train travel had not brought me good luck, I should change my mode of travel, go cheaper rather than more expensive. I should hitchhike, as I'd done in my teenage and college years. I was 36 years old now. It was the 1980s, not the 1960s when I'd started hitchhiking. But why not give it a try? What had come to me in Annecy was that what I would do next was I would go and taste sorts of food in southern France that I'd never tasted. I wouldn't go to starred restaurants on the Michelin list. I would go to places along the road that normal people visited. I would get tips from people who were giving me rides in their cars. And I would go where the hitchhiking breeze blew me. But I would go to Marseille and I would taste bouillabaisse because I had never tasted bouillabaisse. So that gave me a jumping off focus for this tour, my gastronomic tour. I do remember riding through Grenoble, France, on my way from Annecy to Marseille, because I was on the back of a motorcycle at that point, holding on to the driver with one arm and holding my suitcase with the other. It was delightful. I remember this one descending section. We were going down through the town, quite hilly town, and the clearance was fairly close to a particular rock wall, I remember, when we were going around a descending curve to the right. And it was great. It was a new sensation. Never had I been on a motorcycle as a passenger with a suitcase in my arms. Through Grenoble, then on south, down out of the mountains, and to Marseille. And in Marseille, I stayed at a cheap hotel, but it had a view of the ocean. I remember being on this high hillside, looking down at the ocean and watching a woman who fed cats. Scores of cats came to her in the afternoon, and she fed them all. That was my outstanding memory of Marseille, apart from the bouillabaisse that I did eat. And I didn't particularly like it. I was surprised. It had this very strong orangey sauce that I tried it at several different places. The sauce always seemed similar. And by the time I was at the third place, a waiter seemed to note my bafflement at the taste of bouillabaisse because I'd always heard what a wonderful thing it was. And he said, "What is it you're wondering about, monsieur? You don't care for our bouillabaisse?" This was a conversation in French. By now, my rudimentary French had come back to me from my schoolboy days. I said, I really expected I would love it, and I don't care for it. It's kind of surprising. And he said, "Monsieur, you are correct. It's terrible, this bouillabaisse we serve these days. It's nothing compared to the authentic thing that used to be served, because all the proper fish for making bouillabaisse are gone. We've killed them off, these families of fish, and now we use substitutes that simply do not work for the dish." I would have told you this before you ate with us, but I couldn't know that this conversation was about to start. And we were having the discussion, of course, in undertones, because it was heresy, what he was saying and what I was saying. But we had spotted each other. We knew we understood each other. And so philosophically, we had a meeting of the bouillabaisse minds there. And I didn't think a Michelin star would have made me enjoy bouillabaisse anymore. But I did very much enjoy my interchange with that waiter. From Marseille, I proceeded along the coast of the Mediterranean, heading west and south toward the Spanish border. We discussed food, these drivers and I, and that opened them right up when I would bring up the topic of food. They love to talk about food, the French. I would say especially in the south of France. It's very genuine. They slow down, they savor their words, their eyes attain a dreamy quality, and it helped them be expansive and friendly with me. One man said, "It is a warm day. You must be drinking a little Pernod on a day like this. You have to have a digestive drink." I said, "Pernod, now is that anisette?" He said, "Yeah, it's very like anisette. They're closely related." "Do you care for this drink, monsieur? Do you like it?" And I said, "I've never drunk it. I've heard that it tastes a little like licorice, we call it in English." He said, "Yes, I know that taste, monsieur, but no. This is nothing like that. And in an alcoholic form, it's so much better. You get a little of the drink, you put it in the bottom of a glass that's shaped just so, and you add a little cold water. I know a place up the way. They're friendly, the people who run the bar. We'll have a Pernod there, and you'll see what I mean." And we did, and it was delicious. And what was most delicious about it was the companionship of this man guiding me through the tasting of this French drink in France, in the heat, out under the canopy, where one was meant to drink Pernod. He was smoking Gauloise Gitane cigarettes, and we were very happy in the heat of the afternoon with this Pernod starting to work its wonderful change through our systems. And then I found myself on the 3rd of October, this I remember specifically, the 3rd of October, on a hot, sunny afternoon, I found myself in the city of Narbonne, as we say in French. When I ate my lunch, I didn't drink any wine. I had a cup of coffee at the end, and I sat writing in my little loose-leaf notebook about Maria in Bern, Switzerland. I wasn't writing about Marseille or about the coast leading around towards Spain. You might have thought that those would be the things I'd be writing about, or about the man who had introduced me to Pernod the day before. But no, I was gloomily scribbling about a woman who had been uncertain as to whether to reject me thoroughly, who was by this time in Heidelberg with Willi, her German friend. And how could I be original? I'd been thinking about her for days, and the same material circulating round and round in my gloomy head and my gloomy fantasies of what a wonderful time she must be having in Heidelberg. But I wasn't having such a bad time in southern France. Most people would have been envious. Gastronomic Tour. The place I really wanted to make it to was Dordogne, home of cassoulet, home of confit de canard, wonderful dishes I'd heard about that were especially well made around Périgueux, Toulouse, all these locations in the southwest of France. So I was in Narbonne, and I was thinking I would hitchhike next from Narbonne on around the coast to Perpignan. That was the next city of any size. And from there I would head west and a little north. That was one idea. I would ask people, and they would tell me, I would get tips, and I would go as people advised me. As the road took me, I would go. Well, first I had to get out on the open road again. And so I packed up my loose leaf notebook, put it in the outer pocket of my suitcase, started walking further west in the city of Narbonne to find a good place for flagging down a lift. Had to be a place where people had room to pull off. Couldn't be too grimly looked on by the police. It had to be fairly acceptable in a number of ways. I walked and I kept walking. There was a roundabout and I walked around it and I kept going. And I was walking and I was looking at the homes in the area. I was in a residential area. There were a few like filling stations occasionally, but mostly it was residential. I was walking along at a good clip. The sun was beating down. A few clouds were floating lazily across the sky. And then, boom, just like that, boom, I wasn't walking along anymore. I was staggering backwards, and I had walked straight into a huge lamppost. Not a normal-sized lamppost that might fool anybody into walking into it, although I'd never walked into a lamppost before, but an enormous stanchion made of pale blue metal with beveled little edges, 80 or 90 feet way up into the sky with power lines strung along it to the next great big stanchion and the next one behind me that I had not walked into, but somehow walked around. This one, however, I walked straight, boom, into it, and I hit my mouth against this thing. Metal, hard metal. It's like being slugged with a Klaus Oldenburg baseball bat that's 90 feet long. Only I had done the slugging myself. I'd walked straight into this thing, whap, and I felt my mouth, and I was missing part of my tooth. This one off center here, this little thing, bicuspid or some damn thing, it was gone. The tip of it was about halfway there still. There's this jagged snaggle left. Felt it with my tongue. Felt it so hard. I was so mad at myself. My knees had nearly buckled. I'd gone partway down. I hadn't fallen on the ground. But every time I felt, it didn't make a difference. It still wasn't there, this part of the tooth. I looked down in the gravel at the base of this huge electric post. What was I looking for? The fragment of my tooth? To put it back into my mouth somehow? Glue it back in place? And there was another thing too. In this part of my forehead, my temple, I could feel a stunning pain. And each time I felt it, the protrusion, the swelling was larger. And in time, I could tell that I had this huge goose egg on this part of my forehead. And in fact, even today, all these years later, if I look at it just the right angle at the right light in a mirror, I can see a kind of raised area there as a reminder of how foolish it is possible for me to be when I'm not paying attention to my surroundings. When I'm thinking of Bern, Switzerland, when I should be thinking of the place where I am. In that case, Narbonne, southern France. When I stopped looking for the fragment of my tooth, I looked around me to see if anyone had witnessed this highly unusual event I had instigated. There were homes. They had windows facing me. They had shutters, but most of them were not shuttered at the time. Were there people standing there behind these windows, staring agape at me, at this middle-aged traveler with a suitcase and a little beard, staggering around looking at this pillar he's just walked into? My brother Ted had told me one time in Ithaca, when Ted was a young guy and I was maybe a teenager, that he had been parked at the James Way Shopping Center on Triphammer Road in Cayuga Heights in Ithaca, New York, on a Sunday. All the stores were closed. The parking lot, vast parking lot, was empty, except for Ted sitting in his car. He didn't explain why he was there. He was looking out at this parking lot in the afternoon, and then he saw that he was not the only car there. There was one other car puttering slowly across the parking lot in the distance. And then, to my brother's astonishment, he saw this car drive straight into a lamppost. No kidding. Straight into the lamppost. Clang! A loud noise carried across the parking lot. The car stopped dead. The post didn't move. Neither did my lamppost. And Ted had said that that was the most appallingly astonishing, comical thing he'd seen in years. Well, it's too bad he wasn't in Narbonne to see me walk into my lamppost, but he wasn't. No one seemed to be. What slapstick that was. What wonderful vaudeville. I mean, people work hard at trying to master these pratfalls they do on stage. This had been no pratfall. This was the real thing. I had attacked myself. So I was standing there under this hot sun. I was thinking, well, it's October 3rd. Tomorrow's Dad's birthday. He'll be 75 years old. I'm glad Dad wasn't here to see this. Ted would be one thing. He would have enjoyed it. But Dad might be worried if he saw me walking into a lamppost in southern France. He might have thought I was drunk or something, and I wasn't. I was completely sober, which in a way made it worse. You don't want to be sober walking into a lamppost. You don't want to be drunk either, but it's more embarrassing. It's much more embarrassing, much more mortifying to be completely of your right mind insofar as you're capable of a right mind, and to walk dead on into a lamppost, knock out half of a tooth, raise a huge goose egg on your temple. So I was pondering these things. I was thinking of Bern, Switzerland, and how pathetic I looked, how pathetic the world looked. I was thinking of my father's birthday coming up the next day. I wasn't thinking particularly deep thoughts. And then a car pulled up. I wasn't trying to flag down a ride. I didn't have my thumb out. I think I had my back to the traffic coming my direction. But this little car pulled over the curb and stopped right beside me. And a little man hopped out. A little man, about 5 feet tall. Spry little fella. And he said, "Monsieur." He had a strong accent. I wasn't sure where it was from exactly. Monsieur was a kind of Midi accent from southern France, but it had an added element that I learned later was Catalan. He was a Catalonian from the border area. I knew Catalonia was in Spain, but I didn't realize it extended up into France until I met this man, Paul. And Paul said, "Monsieur, are you in some kind of trouble?" in French. And I said, "Well, yes, I just now walked into this lamppost and I knocked out part of my tooth and I feel very stupid." The man said, "Well, I should introduce myself. My name is Paul. Get into my car. We'll go home. I'll take care of you. It'll be all right. Everything is beautiful, really." And so here he was, my savior angel, there to help me out of nowhere. How had he arrived? Just after my goose egg raised itself on my temple and my tooth shattered. By what sort of luck? I looked at his car then. It hadn't been moving fast when it slowed down for me. I didn't think it was capable of moving fast. It said that it was something called a tom car. It looked to me like a golf cart that had gotten loose from the golf course and was out on the highway. I wondered how long we would roll down the highway before we were arrested for being a golf cart instead of a car on a highway, even a French highway with small cars. But I got in gratefully with my suitcase, and down the road, very slowly, we rolled. Maybe 20 miles an hour, 25 at the most. We were on the shoulder of the road a good deal of the time when that was convenient, and when it wasn't, he'd go out onto the main lane and he'd slow down traffic. He was unfazed by that, this man Paul, or Monsieur Paul, as I always called him. He said he was going to take me on a tour, and soon we rolled into Perpignan, and we passed through a place called the Gare de Saint-Charles, St. Charles Station, which he explained was one of the biggest gathering spots for long-haul truckers in the whole of Europe, certainly in France. It had a capacity of 5,000 trucks in this place. No, maybe 10,000 trucks. The Gare de Saint-Charles was splendide. It was magnifique. It was impeccable. He loved the word impeccable, Paul did. But to give me the full tour of this place, we had to go by a guardhouse to go into the grounds of the truck station. And they flagged us down as we were approaching the security gate. And he waved in a friendly way and kept puttering along. Didn't stop, didn't worry about it. They waved after us, but we just kept going. He drove me around, showed me all the trucks. Splendide! When we made our way out through the gates of the truck enclosure, he did slow down and explain to the guards that he was with an American milliardaire. I'd never heard this word before. He used it several times, describing me. Milliardaire. I had the feeling he was describing me as an American millionaire. So I tried to hold up my end of it, straightened my spine a little bit. I didn't know how a millionaire acted, especially in a tom car going 20 miles an hour. The guards looked at me and snorted. They didn't believe that I was American or a millionaire, evidently. And Paul said, "Well, you must prove to them, monsieur, that you are this American milliardaire." So I pulled out my American passport, I showed them, and I talked to them about baseball a little bit in English. They were very impressed to have a millionaire from New York City, I said, because that's what they wanted to believe, at their guard post. We were all rather chummy all of a sudden. And maybe they would know this Paul the next time he pulled in with some other wacky passenger. He liked to tell me that he was like a movie star. Everyone knew him, and he had particular gifts no one else had. Now, I didn't observe that anyone seemed to know him particularly. The guards hadn't known him, But when we were sitting parked in this little Tom car, the lights in the whole city suddenly went out, or at least all the lights where we were. And I said to him, what just happened here? The lights all went out. And he said, yes, that happens all the time where I am. It has to do with my natural magnetism. They go out, and then in a few minutes they'll come back on, and that's my magnetism too. Don't be alarmed. It just happens when I'm in a place. Sure enough, in a couple of minutes the lights came back on. He nodded. He wasn't surprised. I should learn not to be surprised either at anything that happened while I was with him. Just as he was not judgmental in the slightest about the stupidity I must have exhibited by walking into a lamppost and knocking out half my tooth. These things happen. It had happened. He was sorry. Nothing could be done about it. I had this goose egg on my head. Must have looked rather comical. He didn't laugh. He didn't think it was slapstick exactly. It was just the way life was. Then we drove around through the fields a bit. He gave a description of all the kinds of produce that was growing there. Potatoes, this, that, the other thing, names I didn't understand. Tout nouveau, he said, tout nouveau, everything new. Que c'est splendide, monsieur, ces champs pleins de patates. Fields full of potatoes. It's splendid, just splendid. Impeccable. Meantime, I was starting to have some ideas having to do with my snaggle tooth situation, a scheme by which I could parlay this small disaster into a little sympathy from Maria in Bern when she got back from her trip to Heidelberg. Maybe it wouldn't have gone so well with Willie. These trips don't always go so well, you know. Just as mine to Bern had not gone marvelously well, maybe her trip to Heidelberg would be a disaster, and she would be craving a little attention on her return. I could send her a photo of my poor self after being wounded by this lamppost. Hard to describe it any way that would redound well on my character, but you never know with a person. I won't say you never know with women, but you never know with any person how they're going to respond to your own misfortune. Sometimes it brings out the best in a person. It brought out wonderful qualities in this little man, Paul. So we motored along. Splendide. Merveilleux. And eventually we motored on back to his home outside Perpignan. This was, after all, my gastronomic tour, and he was going to feed me, he said. And you know, he surprised me by coming up with a pretty good meal. He made a nice omelet with all the fixings. We had some more anisette that he had, and some wine, maybe a bit too much wine. And we sat around. I didn't tell him about Maria in Bern. I'd had enough misfortune in the day. I didn't want to share and deepen his mood with that. But instead, he got a little sentimental himself and started talking about a woman named Nellie. A young woman, sounded like she was only about 20. He had had her in residence there at his little ramshackle place. She had been there for the vendange. He kept talking about the vendange, which I came to gather was the grape harvest for winemaking. Took me a while to figure that out, but then I knew that was what he meant. And she had helped out in the harvest, and then she had ditched him. And he was heartsick at the loss of his Nellie. She had gone back to her parents' home in Angers. Where Angers was, I wasn't sure until I checked with my map later. It was in the north of France, quite a ways away, hundreds of miles. But Nellie was supposed to call him up that night at 8 o'clock. 8 o'clock came, 8 o'clock passed. At maybe 5 after 8, she called. He was very pleased. And they spoke for a while, hung up, and then he started getting sentimental and sore again. If she did come back, he said, he wasn't going to spoil her like he had before. No money, no moto. He had a little motorbike he had lent her, evidently. No laundry, no free electricity and all the trimming. No, sir. He was going to be poor when she got back. He was going to lower the boom on her. He wanted me to stay, it turned out, for the entire week until Nellie came back from Angers. We were sitting there on this sofa that smelled a little bit of dog, but it was a safe haven for me. It was a place where I could let my goose egg on my forehead get as big as it wanted to get and then gradually recede, maybe go all colors of the rainbow along the way, but take care of itself. And then I could venture out into the world again and go on my way on my gastronomic tour and have something a little fancier than an omelet at the next stop. Now, we did go out to a kind of a roadhouse at one point, and there were a number of thugs outside the place who were giving him a hard time for his vehicle. He was nonchalant and went on his way. And then he told me when we were having drinks a little later that at this same place, about 6 months earlier, a crowd of these louts had given him a hard time and were closing in on him in his Tom car. And he pulled out his gun. And as he spoke, he took this pistolet out of his glove box, and it was a great big revolver of some sort. And he starts waving it around in front of me. This is what I did. He said, I shot up into the air, and that scared them off. They fell back. They respected me then. They know me now. He handed it to me, and I was glad to have it because it meant he didn't have it. It meant it wouldn't go off by his volition. I looked closely at it. It seemed to have 8 chambers of this revolving gizmo in the gun. He took it back from me, starts waving it around again, and he removed one of the bullets from one of the chambers, handed me the bullet. And it looked kind of funny. It didn't look like any picture of a bullet I'd ever seen. It had a kind of a clear nose with little tiny things in it, like miniature tiny BBs or something. And I wondered if it was kind of buckshot in these bullets. He explained, it took us a while with our odd French and my not understanding the jargon of weaponry, that what these were was not real bullets, but blanks, like for a starter pistol, or for making a movie about the Bad West or something, or for scaring off drunken young louts, which had worked. Once, anyway. My friend Paul. My scheme, which had been developing, this sympathy scheme, was to go someplace and have my picture taken, a sort of sick grin with my bad spot showing, and maybe featuring what was left of the other evidence of my incompetence in life. Was that a good idea? I wasn't sure. But it was the best I could come up with. I asked him if there was a place where he could take these strips of photos in a booth. I didn't have a camera with me. I wasn't that sort of tourist. I like to think that I wasn't a tourist exactly at all. I was on a serious gastronomic tour. I wasn't going to the Eiffel Tower on this trip. I wasn't going to see the wonders of Arles. I was interested in getting myself in a place where I could have a good, genuine cassoulet and a confit de canard and find out what they were. I'd found out about bouillabaisse, that the whole thing was a fraud and the fish had died generations ago, but I still had to find out about confit de canard and the others. Finding out about Pernod had been a surprise and a very pleasant one. Paul did know about one booth that took pictures. We went there. It was at the train station. It wasn't working. It was out of order. Finally, I gave in and I bought a cheap camera, almost a disposable camera. It cost me something like the equivalent of $30. Came with 3 rolls of film though. So I took a few pictures of Paul and his friend Joseph and his car, Paul with and without his hat, and I took a couple pictures of myself to send back to Switzerland. Got the film processed in Perpignan, got the photos back, studied them. I don't remember if I ever sent them, but I don't think it would have made any difference. We ate a few good meals together, Paul and I. I learned all about his friend Nellie, and before the week was up, I did desert him. I felt bad about it, but I said, Paul, you really have to take me out on the highway towards Andorra. I'm going to go there, and then I'm going to make my way from Andorra on across to Dordogne and find out about these food items, because it's time I continued my tour. He was a little downcast at this news, but not bad. He didn't take me back into Narbonne, where the disaster had occurred. He was nice enough to take me in a different direction so I'd be on the way to Andorra, which wasn't through Narbonne in any case, but I wouldn't have liked to go back past that same avenging lamppost. I'd seen it enough. My nail clippers had just a bit of a nail file that would swing out, and I used that nail file to file down the nastiest point of this broken tooth so my tongue wouldn't hurt itself in its constant curiosity, its perverse need to go visit this scene of the accident. So that helped, and I made my way further west, and eventually I found some very nice places, had some excellent meals, and met more lovely people along the road, but no one who helped me out as much as Monsieur Paul with his little blue tom car.